One man sold the art world more than 1,000 fake Picassos, Matisses, and Modiglianis. Some of them may still be hanging in museums today. And the reason he got away with it for so long wasn't just that he could paint, it was that the people buying them had every reason not to look too closely. His name, or at least the one he used, was Elmyr de Hory. His real name was Elmyr Albert Hoffman, born in Budapest in 1906 to a lower middle-class Jewish family. But by the time anyone in the art world met him, that person didn't exist anymore. He was de Hory, aristocratic bloodline, hidden wartime art collection, tragically displaced European with impeccable taste, all invented and all completely convincing. He had trained seriously as an artist in Paris and Munich, the right schools, the right teachers. He genuinely could draw, but his style was classical and careful, and by the time he landed in post-war New York, nobody wanted that. The market wanted Picasso and Matisse, the bold modern gesture, and Elmyr could do those too. He just wasn't supposed to sell them under someone else's name. In 1947, he walked into a New York gallery with a drawing he'd made in the style of Picasso. He was nearly broke, on a 3-month visa, and carrying a story about being a displaced European with a few family pieces to sell. The dealer didn't ask for provenance, didn't ask for certificates, just paid him and hung it on the wall. He stayed 12 years. He moved between New York, Miami, Los Angeles, and Chicago, and he kept selling. A Matisse here, a Modigliani there. He was good enough that gallery owners didn't just accept the works, they were grateful, because he was bringing them exactly what their clients wanted. The quiet European with the slim portfolio of family pieces was doing them a favor. And he was careful. He never sold 2 works from the same supposed collection to the same gallery. He used pseudonyms, Louis Cassou, Joseph Dory Boutin, E. Reynal, and at least a dozen others. He kept moving, and he never, according to him, signed a single painting with a forged signature. That part he left to someone else. The first real crack came in Boston. He'd sold 3 drawings to the Fogg Museum at Harvard, a Picasso, a Matisse, and a Modigliani. 3 different artists, 3 different periods, 3 different styles, but a curator laid all 3 out on a table and noticed something she couldn't explain. The line quality, the way certain shapes were handled, was the same across all 3. Something that shouldn't connect 3 completely different artists was connecting them. She didn't buy the next piece he offered, and then she started calling other institutions. That was when the American art world started asking questions. Not loudly, not yet, but the name A. Reynal began showing up in careful phone calls between curators and gallery directors across the country. De Hory felt the ground shifting and left for Europe. In Paris in the mid-1950s, de Hory was at a cafe trying to sell a drawing to a buyer who wasn't biting. A man at the next table leaned over, looked at the work, and told the buyer he'd be a fool to pass on it. That man was Fernand Legros. Legros was not a painter. He was handsome, flamboyant, multilingual, and completely without limits. He could walk into any room and make the people in it feel like they'd been waiting for him. He looked at what de Hory had been doing for a decade and immediately understood the problem. It was being run at the wrong scale. So he made a proposal. De Hory would paint. Legros would sell. A third man named Réal Lessard would handle the mechanics, paperwork, shipping, logistics. And Legros would do the thing he was born to do, build stories that sounded so boring they had to be true. And the reason nobody caught on is almost embarrassing. Legros didn't sell excitement. He sold provenance, a Swiss private collection held since the 1930s, a Belgian family estate, a retired Paris dealer liquidating inventory, the kind of paper trail that makes an expert's eyes glaze over. And that's exactly the point. Nobody double-checks a boring footnote. Nobody flies to Zurich to verify a storage receipt. You hear Swiss collection, and something in your brain files it under legitimate, and moves on. With Legros running the front and Lessard handling the back end, they went global. In one deal alone, Legros walked into a gallery in Houston with a Matisse watercolor, told the owner it came from a Belgian estate being quietly liquidated, and walked out with a check for $60,000. The whole meeting took 40 minutes. Then he did the same thing in New York, then Paris, then Tokyo. 5 continents over 9 years. The works moved from galleries into private collections, and from private collections into other private collections, and somewhere along the way, they picked up the most valuable thing in the art world, a history of having been accepted. Every institution that held one made the next sale easier, because the paintings were getting more real the longer they circulated. Not because they were getting more authentic, because everyone who'd already bought one had a reason not to look too hard at the ones that came next. De Hory himself put it best. If my work hangs in a museum long enough, it becomes real. And he wasn't being philosophical, he was describing exactly how the business worked. By the early 1960s, they generated an estimated $50 million. And that's how they got to Algour Meadows. He was a Texas oil millionaire, the kind of collector who bought seriously and in volume. Over the course of his relationship with Legros, Meadows acquired 40 works. Picasso, Matisse, Modigliani, the full modern canon, all from a dealer he trusted completely by that point. When he finally had them properly examined, all 40 were fake, every single one. Meadows went to the press, then to the lawyers, and suddenly, the Whisper network that had been running quietly for years became something nobody could ignore. 40 paintings from the same guy. That's not a one-off, that's a system. Investigators started pulling threads, and every time they looked at a different painting from a different collector, they kept finding the same backstories and the same dealer behind it. In 1970, a French court convicted Legros, and de Hory, by then, was already living in Ibiza. He had moved there in 1967 and built the life he'd always been performing. He had a cliffside villa, threw dinners with Marlene Dietrich and Ursula Andress, and walked around in a golden monocle and a patterned cravat like he'd been born into royalty, which of course he hadn't. He was the most interesting man on the island, and everyone believed it because he'd been practicing that character his entire adult life. In 1969, a writer named Clifford Irving came to the island and turned de Hory's story into a book called Fake, which became an international bestseller and made Elmyr a genuine celebrity. And if that name sounds familiar, Irving is also the man who later got caught selling a completely fabricated autobiography of Howard Hughes to a major publisher. So the person who made the forger famous eventually got caught doing his own version of the same trick. You genuinely cannot make this up. Then Orson Welles showed up with a camera. F for Fake, 1973. De Hory on screen, charming and evasive, painting right in front of the lens, explaining nothing and everything at once. He'd been playing this character his whole life, so a camera crew was nothing new. But fame has a cost. Everyone now knew his name, his face, and his island. France wanted him extradited, and Spain started building a case against him too. De Hory had spent 30 years staying one step ahead of the paperwork, and he was running out of road. In December 1976, as extradition reached a critical point, he overdosed on barbiturates at his villa. He was 70 years old. When Spanish police arrived, they weren't sure who he was. He had used so many names for so long that even at the end there was genuine confusion about which identity was real. So they took fingerprints from his body just to confirm it. The guy who spent his whole life making fake identities for paintings didn't even have a real one for himself. After his death, collectors started buying works he had signed under his own name. Not fakes, originals. Elmyr de Hory, the forger, as the artist. And then, because the art world absolutely cannot help itself, people started forging those too. There are now fake Elmyrs on the market, forgeries of a forger. So now there are experts trying to figure out whether a fake is a real fake or a fake fake. Somebody's paying them by the hour for that. Enjoyed this story? Leave a like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next one. Now you know.